Hey, Trisha here. Today I'm going to go over why I am choosing to paint the Prickly Pear Cactus and why I chose this particular composition. And we are going to build this from the ground up, literally. I'm starting with the dirt level, and then I'm placing the rocks on top of that and the cactus on top of that, and I'm bringing it forward. This is going to be kind of a loose, fast style. I'll get a bit more detailed on the focal point as it comes forward. So join me. To put this painting in context, I discovered these cacti growing near the Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado, although they can be found in many parts of the U.S. I came across many flowers while we were on our trip, but I especially love the symbolism of this one, and I'll explain that at the end of this video. I took several photos, but the ones taken in full sunlight often lack definition because everything is evenly lit. I selected this one because it was taken in the early morning light and has a good balance of cool and warm tones. Previously, I recorded this base, getting it prepared in acrylic. I was recording it in the wrong format. So I will give you a synopsis of what I did. I'm just, as I've done before, used acrylics for the underpainting. And I used just a combination of colors mixed together. Burnt umber, alizarin crimson, deep violet, a little bit of cerulean blue hue, and some ultramarine blue. Okay, so I kind of just mixed those together in a mess and slapped them on the canvas. Okay, so my photo printed a little too blue, but I do like how we have some very warm warms and some very cool blues. Only the top part of the cactus and the blossoms are in the sunlight. So right now we're doing mainly the background, so we're dealing with all cools. So I haven't even bothered to put the orange and the yellow out on my palette yet. Here is my palette. I'm always looking for better ways to illustrate, what I'm doing and to make it easier on you. I have out here yellow ochre, burnt sienna, burnt umber, cad red deep hue, cobalt violet hue, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, Prussian blue, sap green, and a lot of white. Later I will be adding in some orange and cad yellow. This cad deep hue could also be alizarin crimson hue if you have that. Here, when I did this, just drops of water got on it. This is acrylic, once again, and it dries very fast for a dark underpainting. So anyway, that's all those little spots are there. It's not a big deal. We'll be going over them. Okay, here we go. I'm using safflower oil as my fat thinner and Gamsol as my lean thinner. First, on this dark dirt base, I'm going to lay in all cool rocks. I'm speeding this up 800%. So I'm taking some of the warm tones in the background and by mixing together ochre and burnt sienna and red, but I'm cooling those down with the purples and the blues. All those rocks are in shadow, So they're going to be cool tones. I can see on the video there's a little bit of a highlight because it's wet oil. The light is reflecting off of it. That is not bright white. It's actually a bluish tone. Remember, rocks are not gray. They're rarely gray. Add interest to your paintings by using all color. I don't actually even have black out on my palette. I'm using all colors to mix variations of what we think of as being gray rocks, but they're really all different colors. I'm also doing variation around the canvas by having the top right and bottom left of the palette be more purple and red, and then the other two corners be more blue. So I try to create variation all throughout the painting, and there really is variation in the photograph because you can see more of the red soil in some areas than in other areas. And I'm just creating this very loose, warm background. Now you'll see that the lighting shifted. I realized that I was having some weird highlights. I'm using my finger. I often will use my finger to soften areas, and it's one of the reasons why I use hues instead of cadmiums and cobalts. See, I'll touch in some paint and then I'll use my finger to soften the areas. Those rocks will look a little unfocused, which will help them to recede into the background. I'm leaving bits of that very dark acrylic background. To build the painting this way, it really speeds it up. For you to try to do that darker shadow around each rock would not be time efficient at all. So to lay that very dark base down first and then do your lighter colors on top of it is a much better way to go. Just building, building, building all through this, adding a lot of variation, making it interesting. Some of the rocks are more textured. They look more like chunks of granite. Others are sandstone. So the ones that look more like chunks of granite have variation and speckles within the rock. So I'm alluding to some of this. The rocks are not perfectly placed the same way that they are in the photograph. I'm not worried about that. You'll drive yourself crazy if you're trying to do an exact reproduction. Here I'm showing you that I'm now adding in the Indian yellow, cad yellow, and lemon yellow into the mix. I decided not to do the orange. I thought the Indian yellow mixed with the red that I already have on the palette would probably be a better representation of that orangey red color at the base of the blossoms and on the cactus. Okay, so now I'm starting to lay in the slabs of cactus. I should have looked up what those are called. They're just these big flat oval things. Technical term there. Some are in light, some are in shadow. So as I'm mixing my paint, I'm keeping that in mind. Again, you want a lot of variation in there. Don't put in flat greens, and don't put in greens just right out of the tube. Make them either, cooler or warmer by adding other colors in there. Right now, just trying to get some of the elements in place. Again, I'm not sweating whether it is perfect or not. That one is all in shadow. And that one behind it has just a spot of warm light on it. Okay, now those are some of the bases of the blossoms that will become the prickly pear fruit. If you have not tried prickly pear fruit, I do recommend it. But I do like to try weird things like that. That used to be a game with the kids when we went shopping. We'd try weird fruits and vegetables. And now I'm adding some texture in there. All of those have some texture. I'm not getting caught up on, where every bump is. Just alluding to it. Again, have to get my fingers in there. I'm going now with smaller brushes to add some of the roots and the grass that are in the background. Again, those are all things that are in shadow, so I'm painting them in blue and purples. Most of them are dead, so there's not really green in the mix. But adds a lot of interest back there. Again, not getting caught up in exactly, what blade of grass is going where. I'm thinning it. I'm showing you that little cup because I've got my safflower oil in there, and that makes the paint flow more easily. So I can pull those little spines out of the cactus. And I'm starting at the cactus and pulling away from it. So as I pull out, it is going to make the end of the little spike or the spine look sharper. Some of them I'm going in and just softening the ends with my finger. Oh, I put the blossom in the wrong place. So I'm going in to fix a couple of those rocks and moving it over. Starting with the base on the blossoms of that deep reddish color. And then building on top of that. That blossom's in shadow, the other one is in light. So I'm just kind of bringing in the elements. Now that one big blossom, I actually took that from another photograph and photoshopped it in. You have artistic license to do things like that to improve your composition. And I wanted that beautiful opened blossom to be my focal point. And when I was shooting, all these different photos, wasn't thinking about that. So I was able to merge the blossom from one photograph into the other photograph. The photo also had a little bee on the blossom. I didn't know what kind of bee it was. I thought about adding a honeybee onto the blossom, but just decided against it. Okay, just building, texture. That blossom ended up being a little too wet for me to do the final layers. So you'll see I'm going to wait until the next day to finish that. More little spikies. I'm in no way trying to put in as many spines on those cacti as are in the original photograph. I'm only alluding to the fact that they do have the spines that stick out. But in the photograph, they had so many that it was really distracting. So I want to be able to see that green, fleshy part of the cactus through the spines, and just give the viewer a hint of those. These are all decisions you're making as you put together your composition. The photography is just a tool to remind me of what those those things look like. I'm not in any way trying to just recreate that photograph. I'm trying to get across the beauty of this flower, and at the end, in a little bit, I'll tell you the meaning behind it. But your job, as an artist, is not to just mimic a photograph. It's to evoke feeling through your work and to communicate. And I'm just layering a little more, doing some highlights here and there. As I look around the final composition, I'm just making sure it's balanced with warm and cool, and balanced as far as some areas being busy, some areas not being busy. Is everything leading to my focal point? I really like that diagonal composition. And I'm really liking how this is coming together and how quickly it's coming together. And I'll have to wait to do the final highlights the next day. It is the next day, and I'm going to add a few highlights that the paint was too wet for me to do that yesterday. So I'm mixing a little bit of lemon yellow with white. And just laying in. It's still wet, but not as wet as it was. Just laying in tops of those petals hit by sunlight. Notice I'm not doing pure white. Pure white can actually look pretty cool. Can kind of look like a cool color. And we want very warm colors here. So if something's in sunlight, always add a smidge of yellow to your white. Warm it up. Okay, so now that has a lot more volume. Personified, I imagine the struggle to survive, many hardships, surrounded by others attempting to do the same. And instead of letting circumstances crush them, they collectively bloom, creating beauty and bearing fruit. It reminds me of artists who often move into the worst parts of cities, struggling to make ends meet, and yet manage to build and create, blossom, so to speak, thereby bringing about revitalization or the fruits of their labor. That blossom is actually in shadow, so I'm going to leave it as it is. And I think everything else is fine. I think I'm done. Thanks so much for joining me for this lesson. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I'd love to hear from you and how you've integrated some of these steps into your own painting. Thanks so much for joining me for this lesson. I hope you really got something out of it. You could help me to continue to give you free content by clicking that like button below and hitting the subscribe button so artzXpress will be easy to find in your subscription list. Also comment. I'd love to start a conversation. Have a great day. Bye.